afternoon. For this session, today we're going to be talking about approaches to digital monitoring, reporting, and verification, how those may influence the market, how we may create structures to govern ourselves given digital approaches, and what that could mean for scale in the market. Is it going to help us speed up our potential reviews of credits and issuance of credits? And how can we use digital approaches to also increase the quality of credits that are being issued, as well as the integrity of the data that's behind them? I am Thomas Blackburn. I'm the head of business development for SustainCERT. SustainCERT is a verification and certification company. We have a digital focus. Our mission is really to lead the digital transition for verification and certification of greenhouse gas emissions, particularly in carbon offsets. We recently released a white paper on digital monitoring, reporting, and verification that you can find on our website. And we want to really, with that, just add to the conversation about what may come with the digital transformation that needs to happen in this space. Really, we've put forward a couple of models about thinking about how digital monitoring, reporting, and verification and the governance of that could work. So we want to have a robust discussion about those things. We are really here to, add to the conversation as we build these new structures about what those should look like, how they should be built. And today, to have that discussion, we have some really experienced carbon market professionals with me. I have Carlos Trujillo, who's the CEO at Cercarbono. Also, David Costa, who's the business head for Latin America at EnKing. Online, we have a couple of participants as well. I'm not sure if we can see them, but online with us, we also have Tim Bauer, who is the COO of Envirofit, a carbon project developer, and Andrew Nobrega, who's the global programs director at Projet. So thank you all for joining us. We're going to divide the conversation today into three parts. First, we're going to talk about the opportunity that digital transformation presents in terms of the digital MRV, what it could bring, what opportunities it exist. Then I'm going to dive a little bit deeper into two approaches that SustainCERT has put forward in the white paper around how those digital MRV approaches could work. We'll talk about a little bit of the pluses and minuses of those things. What are some of the risks and how could we mitigate those in a discussion? We'll open it up for questions, and then we'll talk a little bit about what are next steps and where are we going from here. So with that, I just want to set the scene really quickly on digital MRV. Our core question today is, does the digital transformation scale the carbon market, and how can we do that? Digital transformation has been discussed quite a bit in this market for a couple of years now. It could provide quite a lot of potential benefits. One of those being quality and comparability of data, right, across project types. The digital transformation could bring an increased speed to the review process for projects. It could even help us to actually automate the review of data that we're receiving from projects and get towards issuance of credits much faster, right? So that could all lead to better transparency for buyers on the buyer side of this as well. So all of that sounds really fantastic, right? It sounds like digital transformation could be something that we want to do. But I want to hear a little bit from these project developers and standards that we have today on what that means for them. And I'll start with Tim Bauer, who's online. Tim, thanks for joining us today. You're here on the big screen, live and in person. When I describe those benefits, it sounds fantastic, right? What do you see as some of the benefits of potential digital monitoring, reporting, and verification? And tell us a little bit about Envirofit and how you're thinking about that.
Sure. Thanks, Thomas. First of all, thank you, SustainCERT, for the opportunity and putting on this event. And Andrew and I were just lamenting off camera here that we thought this remote attendance was going to be a good idea, but we really feel like we should be in Rio. So anyway, thank you, everyone. I hope you're all having a great time. Yeah, look, I mean, from the digital side of things, there, in our view, my view as a project developer for a company that's doing clean cooking programs all over the world, there's a lot of opportunity. You know, one of the real challenges that we have in projects like ours is just the cyclicality of the entire process. So, you know, from the point in time that we put a cook stove and a user is using that stove, and we sort of start the carbon clock to the point in time that we issue the first credit and then deliver that credit to a particular buyer, you know, that first stage can be 18 months long. So the cash to cash cycle then becomes a you know, a major barrier for companies to scale. So one of the really interesting and exciting things that we see from a, you know, digitization of this whole process is the ability to really shrink the issuance time and make that, you know, on a much more regular cadence that allows us to deliver the final product to our buyers, deliver that impact to the buyers, and really reduce that cash to cash cycle time. That in turn, you know, changes the dynamics of scale, because if we can bring cash into the program faster and, you know, more forward, then we can actually deploy and create more impact, you know, in any given time period.
Yeah, it sounds like there's quite a few benefits for you guys. Are you all working on any approaches currently, or thinking about how you may deploy digital approaches with your programs?
Well, you know, we incorporate a digital component in the monitoring and verification that we do already. So, I mean, as a cook stove company, every stove that's sold has to be linked, you know, uniquely to an end user. The serial number of the stove has to be linked to a unique individual. So that is all tracked on a digital platform, so that when we finally go to the verification phase and we're bringing third-party auditors in to audit, that process and that data is sort of seamless and easy for them to sort of acquire. But at the moment, you know, the real challenge is that we're still bound by the current cycle times. I mean, it doesn't on a projects like ours, it doesn't really make sense to do verification at an interval any shorter than about, you know, 10 to 12 months, because you're trying to build, you know, a momentum and as many cook stoves as you can in that period of time. I think the end game for us and the goal is really to work with folks like yourselves as you go through this implementation process, and I think be a stakeholder in that, and ultimately, you know, help pave the way for other projects like ours to do this on a more regular cadence.
Okay, yeah, it sounds like there's some challenges coming through there as well as the opportunities. So thanks for that. Coming back to the room, Carlos, just turning to you. At Cercarbono, I know you all have started a conversation about digital transition. You know, can you tell us a little bit about what you all are talking about, how you're thinking about a digital transition, and obviously a bit about Cercarbono and yourself?
Thank you, Thomas. Thank you for this invitation. For the last, must be 3 or 4 years, I've been talking also by the hand of our registry on digital verification. And we think that that's going to be the future, and not talking in 5 or 10 years, near future, in the next coming months or maybe 1 or 2 years. We know that the projects, and in our point of view, the ones based in technology, they need this kind of technology so that they could be more efficient. Also, the data is precise, and using the correct technology, you can have verifications more often. And also, there will be more liquidity and more trust in the market. We think that there need to be some methodologies changes, also methodologies to be developed. And in this way, we think that really soon with the job you're doing, we're going to have some, let's call digital verified credits. And we hope that this is soon. I know that the job you're doing is amazing, and we are really looking forward to continue seeing this type of initiatives and to be part of this type of initiative in the next coming months or years.
Okay, great. It sounds like there's a overall, everyone thinks that this is something that needs to happen, is going to happen, yeah, in the short term. So all in all, it sounds very promising, right? Before we get to Andrew and David, I just want to bring up a slide, if possible, just to make the conversation a little bit more concrete and give you an example of how, of exactly, you know, some of the approaches that we're looking at in terms of how a digital monitoring and reporting verification system could look. Do we have that? Yeah, go to the next one. Yeah, perfect. So this is the white paper that we just released. And here, it's probably a little bit small for you guys in the audience, but you can see on your left side that there's two different approaches that we've looked at. And you can kind of think about how these might look. Over on the left, this represents a digital monitoring, reporting, verification process that looks very similar to the market as it exists today, right? Where you have a project developer that is doing data collection, quantifying those greenhouse gases and the change that's a part of that project, and then reporting on those. And they would have a platform that's their own, right? That does the digital data collection, does the reporting, and does sort of quality assurance checks within that system. And in that, a verifier would come to actually review that process and that platform in each one of those steps, right? And that's very similar to the system that we have today in the carbon market. The other way that we could potentially think about looking at this in terms of scale is to think about a system where the project developer is really focused on the data collection and reporting, right? And actually a different system holds the greenhouse gas quantification and essentially incorporates the methodology and creates a standardized approach for greenhouse gas quantification across project types. And the verification is built into that, right? So that's the system that you see on the right side. So, you know, with the digital approach, it also raises questions about how and where we verify projects in the overall process, right? Where do we need checks and balances in the digital system? And what is the role of the verifier, right? So SustainCERT as a verifier is sort of asking this question as a part of this white paper and having this discussion, right? With that, David, I wanted to turn to you first and ask you, you know, a little bit about EnKing, what you all are thinking about in terms of digital monitoring, reporting, and verification. Yeah, we'll start there.
Okay, so thank you, Thomas, for the invitation. Thank you, IETA, for the event, for having me here. It's a pleasure for me. I have been working in this carbon market since 2005. So here we go for 17 years already.
Yeah, amazing.
I started my career as a consultant developing projects. Then I became auditor, like changed the hat to start to.
You're in the verification family.
Yes,
yeah.
yes. And then I have been working with carbon market since then. Now currently. I'm working for EnKing. EnKing is an international company focused on the development and trading of carbon credits. Our headquarters is in India, but we have our presence today in 18 countries already. And we do the end-to-end of the process, since the origination, development, verification, until the issuance and trading of the credits. And digital, more than ever, became a reality to us over the last, let's say, few years, right? We have been living together with digitalization for almost everything. And I wish I could have this kind of digitalization at the time that I was auditor at that time, because we usually spend a lot of time making all the checks of the information and so on. But EnKing is trying to make some partnership with some IoT companies, international things companies, and trying to promote a digital MRV system. Today we have about 1,000 projects under development, under verification in all standards like CDM, BCS, Gold Standard, GTC, and so on. And we are about to make these partnerships and try to start some pilotings to start to implement in different projects, different type of projects and standards, to see how it works. Like everything else in this market, carbon market, this will be another learning by doing process, like everything else. Thank you.
Yeah. Are you thinking about various project types and how, you know, if you were thinking about a platform and looking at this, EnKing may want to engage in a digital approach. Would you all want to ultimately develop your own platform that's reviewed by auditors, or would you want to do data collection and have others be a part of that sort of review process?
Yes, probably we will try the two different blueprints that you are proposing to see how it works, because perhaps depending on the type of project, perhaps one of the blueprints could be more suitable for one type of projects or one category, I don't know. And the other ones could be applicable for other kind of projects. So we will test this, because that's the future. I mean, digitalization is the future. I mean, that's it. It's a learning by doing process. So let's see what happens. And as we have many projects, let's try to put some of them in the road, try to check and see how we can benefit from that. I mean, we, the projects, the whole system together.
Yeah, definitely. I think that's the ultimate goal. If we could go back to our online participants just for a second, I wanted to ask Andrew, you know, if you could tell us a little bit about Pure Projet and what kind of digitization you've been thinking about and the project types that you're working on.
Absolutely. Wonderful to be here. Thank you for having me. So Pure Projet, we are a nature-based project developer, nature-based solution project developer. We work particularly within the concept of insetting or supply chain linked interventions, helping companies that have agricultural supply chains to develop agroforestry initiatives, reforestation, forest conservation, and regenerative agriculture projects. So we work with a basis of projects that can be, well, similar by working across 30 different countries, having very different social dynamics, ecosystem dynamics, you know, impact factor associated with those. So for us, you know, we've been very much engaged and watching the evolution of verification processes, been working very closely with Thomas and SustainCERT with regard to how companies are going to value carbon through their supply chain over the coming years. And it's quite clear to us that as an efficiency measure alone, when it comes to data collection, this is an area that we have to focus on. So Pure Projet, whether it's for an agroforestry project, a conservation project, a soil regeneration project, has particularly been focused on improving data collection processes and practices through the use of technology, such as remote sensing through satellites or through drones, through Internet of Things, as was mentioned earlier, to basically reduce the human resource requirement for every verification that we go through. So where we may need to have field and ground visits on a regular basis, let's say every 5 years, to do biomass inventories, we're very focused on whether we can have, you know, more consistent levels of monitoring between those 5-year periods to monitor the projects, adaptively manage the projects, and effectively create a more efficient data collection vehicle. So those are the kind of two areas we're focused on: data collection through technology, whether it becomes tablet data collection, whether that is just simply the filtration process from which we get from 30 different countries, field representatives and technicians, inputting data in a tablet, having that come back to a central database, but also how we actually collect that data from a remote sensing perspective as well. We do ourselves have data analytics that we look at for all of our projects to understand the carbon potential and outcomes of these projects. That is digitally based. But when it comes to verification, today it is very much still going through the traditional P2D submittal process. And we do think that there could be material gains and efficiencies in that. The one area, though, to note that we would be cautious of is because of the diversity of our projects and because of the diversity of ecosystems that we work in, we do wonder if a centralized, as demonstrated here, IQ and V platform, whether that could hold a robust enough library of different sequestration factors based on different species of trees, based on different environments, based on different contexts, to allow us to be as turnkey as that. It's an ideal solution, and it's just a question of, for us, as to whether there can be enough of a data library to house such a turnkey solution.
So if I say that back to you, you feel like there's a strong potential for a more standardized approach with that combined verifier. However, you're concerned about the localization abilities of a system like that, right? To understand the local context and have that data. Exactly. Are you, I think the other thing is, for another piece of it is the evolution of technology itself, especially for land use and forestry, right? Remote sensing, all those things are getting better by leaps and bounds very quickly. Are you all, how are you all keeping up, and are you changing the technology that you're using consistently in how you're looking at projects now?
Yeah, great question. I mean, if we look even 5 years ago, you would be quite limited by the scope of remote sensing from satellites to determine a biomass inventory of a young plantation. So if you're planting cocoa or shade trees amongst cocoa, it was very hard for a satellite to discern between what is a shade tree and what is the existing biomass of those cocoa plants. Over time, we've seen, particularly in the last 5 years, a lot of energy put into that space to basically parse out different ecosystem features at a more granular level, to have higher resolution on these analyses. And this is something that we see as a very competitive space in the market, and in which we're trying to follow and partner with the right organizations that can provide that level of resolution.
So still a bit of a data challenge in that then. Yeah.
Absolutely.
Yeah.
And we live very much in this space right now where we have been doing a lot of field work and data collection from the field. We're really seeking to integrate as much tech as possible. And it's this kind of revolving puzzle of a little bit more from the field, a little bit more from technology. Over time, the technology is able to accumulate more of that data requirement, but it's still a matching of the two at this point.
Thanks, Andrew. Carlos, turning back to you, in those models, is there one that for you as a standard sort of stands out, or how are you all thinking about the digital approach and the role of verifiers in Cercarbono?
Both models are amazing, I think, but for a standard, it's more secure the second model. Then I will incline for the second model. Also, there are some companies that have been doing all the data research of that have been recollecting data for the last years. Then if the project recollects the data, they'll have some information. But if you have the data from all the projects, it will be much more complete. Then there's something that will be more secure for us as a standard.
Okay. Can you explain a little bit more about that? So you're saying that sort of centralized approach would give more comparability across the portfolio of projects for the standard, or?
Yes, and you can compare like from one project to the other project, how are they taking care of the data, and for us will be much more secure.
Yeah, that's understood. In terms of what Andrew was bringing up, do you see challenges in this approach in terms of the localization, and how could you as a standard you know, obviously that's addressed in methodologies today, right? In terms of some generalized approaches. Do you think that they're similar, that those methods could be adapted for the digital approach to multiple data sets, or do you feel like a single one would need to be referenced across those pieces? Yeah. Challenging questions.
It's challenging, but you know, like right now, there's the right technology to do it. Then now we know companies that are measuring carbon in fields, and they're like, it's really impressive to know how exact these measurements are. Then it's really impressive. Then like when he was saying about like the coconuts and the shades, now there's that technology to know how much this coconut tree they have. Then I think that 5 years ago or 3 years ago, it was impossible. But today we have great technology and it's going to keep improving. Then that's the way to go.
Yeah. Are you all thinking about a series? Because I know your standard does multiple project types. Are you thinking about taking digital approaches by type or in any series, or are you thinking of land use as the primary way to go? Yeah.
Actually, like if you talk about technology-based projects, it's easier. When you talk about forestry projects, AR, you can do it. If you talk about RED+, you'll need to be a hybrid because you need to talk with communities, know what's happening over there. And today, I don't know the technology to do that. Then we need an auditor to be in field to know what's happening and talking to people.
Yeah, and I guess, you know, maybe turning back to you, Tim, online, how much of the sort of in-person visit do you guys think could be replaced by a digital approach in the context of the sort of cookstove projects that you're working on?
Yeah, I mean, that's a really good question, and certainly a question mark we have around, you know, as we look at the two blueprints. I mean, in many ways, blueprint one is as it's stated here, it's sort of business as usual. It's what we're already doing, and then there's kind of a verification and spot check on a regular basis. I think we'd like to an idea where we could lean towards blueprint two. Because again, we're already doing data capture on the user details, but really then, you know, you've got to have at some point, you've got to have this kind of recurring audit. And on a cookstove project, that audit is kind of two parts. It's a field visit to go and visit a sampling of some number of users. But then there's also a technology evaluation where you're doing a you know, water boil test or a kitchen performance test, and you're actually validating that the technology is still performing to what the methodology had stated, or what you had stated originally in your documentation. That has a, you know, that's a fairly heavy lifting component of a cookstove project, because it's, you know, it's people on the ground, and it's actually, you know, conducting data testing of the performance of the products. I think there could be a way to, you know, kind of make that spot check. Obviously, you know, number one for us is validating the impact. So we've got to make that spot check robust enough to where it's you're bringing quality data to the forefront and validating that data. But I do feel like we could make that spot check kind of you know, just on, if you're doing it on a regularized interval, that it could actually help your whole cost structure and make the entire verification process cheaper and more efficient. So I think from our perspective, there's certainly opportunity there, but it has to, you know, it has to pass ultimately the litmus test of validating the impact. And I think we've, you know, there are in the cookstove space, there are some technologies around putting sensors on a small number of cookstoves to validate and verify that they're in use. So you can kind of see a heating temperature profile of, you know, on a daily basis when someone's cooking, you know, breakfast, lunch, or dinner, you see the temperature spike, and then you see the temperature come back down as the stove cools off. So you can see that the stove is being used over time. You know, the reality though is those sensors are a bit cost prohibitive to the cost of the product. I mean, they have a relatively high cost. relative to the cost of the product. So, it's not the kind of thing where we could go and do, a huge percentage of the sample of the, say you have 50,000 cook stoves out there, you might be able to do a few hundred sensors, but you really couldn't do, thousands and thousands of those effectively, at least in our experience. So I think there's kind of there's a bit of a push and pull there, a bit of tug of war, to really find that right balance.
Need more technology adoption to sort of bring the cost of the actual technology down, right, over time. Do you feel like this will be a phased approach for cook stoves? Do you feel like, the process to digital parts of it will go digital before other parts?
Yeah. It feels to me like for cook stoves, in order to get a digital monitoring and verification, certified result, that we're probably going to have to do some things in parallel. So you're going to have to do kind of a digital verification, and you're going to have to kind of continue to do, the standard verifications that we've done historically with third-party auditors going on the ground at a sort of annual cycle, and then kind of compare those results and make sure that they're robust. I think over time, with reasonable spot checks on ground, that you could actually, begin to issue on a weekly or monthly or even quarterly basis, credits at that interval would be greatly improved over what it is right now.
Thanks, Tim. David, do you feel like, you mentioned that you worked at DNV previously as an auditor, right? Do you feel like there's, what are the sort of risks that you see in Blueprint 2 of an auditor taking more of that quantification piece, right, as a part of the system? Are the internal checks at the auditor enough, right? What would you feel like you may need to see for that to be a trusted model?
Yeah, that's a good question, Thomas. Going back when I was an auditor and thinking about digital verification now, the second blueprint about integrated quantification, although the technology, whenever it could be used in an efficient and smart way to improve productivity, gain efficiency, and so on, is always welcome. We just need to realize that, okay, how much effort can we put on this and how much this will cost? It was said before also. But I think that nothing substitute, let's say, the good sense of the auditor in the field. Because when you, I have been in many countries visiting many different type of projects, and even having like the same type of project, let's say, for instance, a hydro project in Brazil or in other countries in Latin America, data and information is provided to you in different ways. There is no standard. It's not the same. The type of the project is the same. The electricity is the same, but the documents, the evidence provided to you, they could be quite different. And I was wondering if the automated system will be able to, in the second blueprint, will be able to, let's say, pick up the right information from the right place, because like energy is not just a simple Excel sheet with one column. You have like 6 or 8 columns with different aspects of the same electricity generated. Reactive power, active power, there is plenty of it. And we need to go to the precise one, the net electricity generation, and in the right point of the system. And when the auditor is in the field, he can feel, he can of course do the many interviews with the people and try to get the information, and depending the way the information is provided, then you can think about, okay, how can I cross-check this information? Because more importantly is to guarantee the traceability of the information. How can you make sure that the information that you receive, which could be Excel file, PDF, there is no fraud in it. It's accurate, is correct. I mean, as an ex-auditor, we need to track the traceability. Okay, where this data comes from? How comes from that device? Okay, how this device what is the source of information of this device? So you need to go back since the very beginning where the raw data has been generated and make sure the accuracy is appropriate to that. And this is one of my concerns or doubts that I have. Okay, will the automated system be capable of take this and depending on the information that we got during the auditing process, the auditor can think about, okay, is this reasonable? Is this data or information reasonable, or is there some kind of deviation? Do we need to request a deviation of the monitoring report or the data? So I don't know if the automated system will have this kind of sensibility to make the right judgment based on the information that is automatically uploaded in the system. So these are just some of the questions that I have. And last but not least, there is also the barrier language. We need to create a system in which it will be possible to identify different languages, because except for Brazil that speak Portuguese, the rest of Latin American countries, they speak Spanish. So the system, if the system is ready just for English, we will have a problem. So we need to have this. So many different issues need to be taken into account.
Bring it to the context of where we are, right? Yeah. I appreciate that. And I think that there's, you know, what you're talking about is kind of a tension between the two models, right? Because one, at the same time, it needs to be able to be adaptable to multiple project types, regions, languages, as you're saying, data sources. You know, however, if that became more of the standard, the data potentially could be shaped in the mode of what that looks like, right? If we're thinking about long-term scale, right? And then if we're on the left-hand side, you know, if it's project by project that's still defining their data types, the language that it's in, et cetera, you know, how efficient are verification bodies going to get at that, right? And so I think that's, you know, but it could be one project developer platform that ends up being the one that everyone uses for a certain project type, right? So there's a bit of a tension there, I think, in terms of thinking through that scalability, right? In terms of overall data collection, Andrew, are you seeing, you know, currently that technology adoption is something that's actually increasing cost efficiency in the land use projects that you're working on, or is that actually adding cost to you guys now? And how do you see that over the long term?
Yeah, that's a great question. I think about this a lot because I think for a lot of our partners that we're supporting and obviously are funding these programs, they see technology as you know, the silver bullet to bring costs down. I do think, as you mentioned, over the long run, that's a possibility. And it speaks to what David just spoke about, you know, in one way you just adapted with regards to machine learning, the ability for us to analyze this data with higher integrity over the future. This takes years of data collection, years of analysis, and years of, you know, machine learning to kind of get to that point. At that point, we could see that there's a lower cost of monitoring resulting from the use of technology. In the middle ground, what we're actually seeing is that to attain your certification, let's say you do your ground truthing or your field biomass inventories every 5 years, you still need to do that in the field. So that cost doesn't go away. But what we are seeing is that our partners and our clients want to have annual monitoring on top of that. And that's where the remote sensing is coming in. So every year you have remote sensing of the project, and every 5 years you visit it in the ground. Fundamentally, your cost has actually increased. It hasn't decreased, but the level of integrity of ongoing monitoring has increased. I think we'll see this probably, I'm thinking for a 3 to 5 year period. I'm just, you know, putting out numbers there. I think after that 5 year period, hopefully that global data set that we evolve and all of the learnings that we've had from ground truthing across global projects, that machine learning may be able to catch up and be able to start to reduce the fundamental cost of monitoring on the long term.
And I think the flip side of that is you're saying you're getting something that you feel is higher integrity, right? Do buyers notice that? Yeah. Are they taking note? And can you actually, do you feel like there's a premium for higher quality data that you could potentially produce?
A yes and a no. I think organizations are valuing it, but I would actually say most of the dialogue is around risk. Is that if I fund a project and I'm only going to find out 5 years from now if the carbon is real, I want to know if there was a fire. I want to know if there was a deforestation event. It's more of a kind of monitoring of the risk profile of the project, I find, in the interim. And it's almost one of those things that it's not necessarily gaining premiums on the carbon, but it's raising all boats, right? Everybody's just expected to increase their integrity, not necessarily linked to a premium on the carbon. Now, higher integrity carbon deserves a higher price, but that element, it's a competitive dynamic more so than a premium dynamic.
Okay, great. I'm going to have another question for them, but I do want to turn it to the audience. If anyone has any questions for the panelists about technology choices that they're making, digital approaches, or how verification may work, yeah. I don't know, we may have something from the audience or from online, potentially. No questions, all clear. Yeah. Yeah, question here in the front. Here's a microphone for you.
Thanks. I have a lot of guys back from Pachama with a lot of questions for you, but I'm choosing one here. It's more related to market. They're asking on your vision on how will the legacy market fold into an ecosystem where digital MRV with the methodologies will potentially result in very different credit outcomes. So
with this transition to a more digital approach, how do we bring projects that are already existing and registered up to this new level? Yeah,
exactly.
Carlos, do you want to take a stab at that one? Thinking through as a standard, how do you sort of treat projects equally as the digital transition happens, right? How do you phase out certain methodologies over time? How are you thinking that might look?
And this can be done with methodologies improvement and including technology into the methodologies. And it's going to be a new verifications where you can start adopting this new part of the methodology so that it's complementary and the technology is adapted. That's the way that I see in the future, and I hope that this happen in the next, I don't know, 1 or 2 years max.
And Tim, as a project developer, do you feel that risk of the change coming and having a legacy portfolio that feels like you need to update it? Yeah.
Yeah, I mean that's that's an interesting question. I hadn't really necessarily considered that. I think I guess our viewpoint would be that we sort of would migrate projects into the digital realm, over time, and new projects would start out kind of in that digital realm. I guess from our perspective though, we wouldn't see a real difference in the total net outcome. It would just be sort of phased. I mean, let's just say for a particular cook stove that generates 6 tons per year in offset. Now if you just divide that 6, say, by 12 months, you're producing half a ton per month. I wouldn't say that 6 goes to 7 or 9 or 2. It just is like, it just gets divided amongst a different frequency. I mean, because if we're doing the job right, at least from our perspective, it should be the same net result, if that makes sense.
So maybe that endpoint, because that's from Pachamaya, maybe that's more of land use. So Andrew, I don't know, do you have any thoughts about that? Because there's sort of have been leaps and bounds in remote sensing and things like that over the last couple of years.
Yeah, no, and I wanted to comment. It's a very interesting question, and I see it as in the context of a lot of changes that are happening in our industry. So with regard to government policy, we know that there's the evolution of the nationally determined commitments, and that will have material changes likely to the way that we work. We have the recent release of the land use change guidance for the GHG protocol and the release of the Science-Based Target Initiative for FLAG. You know, these are big shifts that we see coming or are participating in or seeing the evolution of currently, of which we contextualize digital MRV as part of that natural shift. So if we look at GHG protocol and a switch from project level accounting for some of our projects to inventory-based accounting for some of our projects, and the requirements of ongoing monitoring associated with that methodology, it's very clear that technology has to be part of it. And so we recognize that there's going to be a shift, but we see it in the context of maybe 3 or 4 pieces of the industry that affect us on a day-to-day basis, shifting at the same time, and hopefully seeing some alignment and clarity on how they align going forward. And with that, I actually see optimism, because I think some of these changes are materially very good things for the planet, and seek to kind of convey that to the rest of my team that while change can be difficult, change in the right direction is a very positive thing.
Yeah. Better to face the risk head on. Yeah, that's kind of what you're saying there. Yeah. Okay. Any other questions? Yeah. Any more from Pachma? No. Another over here. Yeah.
Thank you very much. I'm really curious about how do you see the possible appearance of new players, for example, that would like to break the way we see actors today, like each one in each doing this task, and it's very clear, but maybe wanting to cover several of those positions that you have in today in different players. Do you see this possible?
Yes. So can we merge some of the roles? So does there need to be a standard, a verifier, and a project developer in the system? Yeah. Does anyone want to think about that? Is there space? Do we need third-party verification in these in carbon credits moving forward if we have more sort of radical transparency in the data collection and you know, the platforms that do that data, collect that data? From a standards perspective, I mean, are you guys thinking that third-party verifiers will be a part of that future for digital?
Maybe I can comment. We see it as, we see 2 potential futures, and we see 2 different types of clients that we have. Those that are 100% going down the line of certified carbon credits and investing purposefully in that. But we also see actors who don't anticipate to certify projects that we work on because they do anticipate transparency, second-party verification, some of them call it, is going to be sufficient for the public to be able to determine integrity of the work that they do, particularly with an inventory approach for carbon. So again, great question. I think we actually are balancing and seeing where the future may go and anticipate that it may not be.
Okay. Any other thoughts on that?
Yes, I think that the third parties are going to be part of this, and that they're going to use your technology also, or other technology that's going to be similar. And in some cases, you'll need humans. In other cases, the technology will be so good that it will straightforward. Yeah. But you'll always need a third party so that there's an independence.
Yeah. So you feel like that third party role will not go away in the near term. Yeah. Okay. Cool. Any other questions from the audience? Okay. Well, thank you guys very much for this participation. I think it was a pretty robust conversation about some of the risks that we see in the way that this might all work, and some of the opportunities that we have as well. I think it's really interesting to consider some of those perspectives, especially even within project types, right? Because this will influence different project types in different ways in terms of the transparency it brings and that transition. I think the last question I have for you all is a little bit related to, what is the way forward? And, what are the concrete sort of next steps that you guys are thinking about? Carlos, you said, it's the near term. We're going to do this in a year, 2 years. Where are you now on this journey? And what are you doing in the next, 6 months thinking through this?
Okay. We've been discussing this with our teams, and we don't have yet the methodology. But once we have adapted a methodology, and when I say 1 or 2 years, they're going to be like the pilot, the phases. And that's where we see that we're going to be in the short term. Also, we need to see how the third parties and buyers and developers are going to adapt. They need to be trained. It's going to be a slow process, and everyone needs to be in the same page. But now it's starting to happen. It's not when, it's going to happen.
Are you all engaging stakeholders in that conversation? How are you thinking about the methodology and the changes that need to be made there? Will that be done in the context of maybe some pilot programs, or do you think that would be done sort of more from the standard or in a cohort? How are you thinking about that?
More like co-working groups.
Yeah.
There's many companies that have lots of knowledge and that will add to this. And it's something that it will be built up with all the stakeholders.
Yeah. So we all need to work together to get it done, basically. Yeah.
That's right.
David, what do you see as the biggest challenge for EnKing to, unlock digital MRV? I know that you all have a really large renewable energy portfolio. Renewable energy is one that people view as sort of in the shorter term has the highest potential for digital approach. What are the biggest challenges for you today in that?
Thanks for this question. Yes, everything depends. As we are about to start some piloting issues, I think the initial questions will start to pop up as the way we start to move forward with this. We plan to start some piloting in some projects, different projects. Perhaps the different blueprints adapt better for one type of projects or another one. So as I said before, it's a learning by doing process. Where I think there is a very room for a potential good, let's say, especially the integrated blueprint. I think it could have a very important role, could be perhaps in the GAG inventories of companies, because many companies, first of all, many companies want to start discussing and engage in the discussion about climate change, carbon credits, carbon markets, and so on, without having necessarily done your homework, which means your GAG inventory. This is step 0 for all of you. I mean, don't waste your time engaging. How can you engage in a conversation so deep like this without knowing and recognizing your emissions? So GAG inventories are a very important, powerful tool, because they provide like a map, or where should you focus your effort to give 20, the ratio of 80-20, like 20% of effort will give you 80% of the results in terms of emission reductions potentials. So in this sense, I believe the integrated quantification blueprint could have a very important role, because most of the companies, they don't know how to do this. They usually hire a third-party company to do this. And for they, it's totally new because it's not linked to their core business. And the integrated can facilitate a lot the data collection, interpretation, make the right calculations, and then you have some kind of standardization of the outcomes and results. So I think besides having all this potential for verification side, we should also think about the digitalization, the integrated quantification, also apply it for GAG inventories. This will facilitate a lot the interest, these companies to assess their own emissions, their own carbon footprint, and then enter in the discussions knowing more about themselves. This is key.
Okay. Yeah. So it sounds like, just getting started is kind of a little bit of what you're saying on the digital front for carbon credits, right? And then saying you feel like there also is a lot of potential to bring this to corporate inventories as well. Yeah. Okay. Andrew, you've talked about quite a few of the challenges to it. Any last thoughts about, what are you guys doing in the next sort of 6 months to try to make this a reality?
Yeah, I think we're going to be fairly aggressive on moving down this pathway. You will see we actually have an RFP out for further digitization on some key topics related to remote sensing. So we're particularly active at this time. And I think for us, it's not only, we're here to talk about carbon, obviously, and that's one big piece of it, but we're also quite focused on other ecosystem service indicators through the projects that we do. And so in unison to what we're doing from the perspective of carbon, we're looking at biodiversity, watershed health, as well as potential other engagements using digitization of data collection. So we're seeking to move it forward, but as we said before, it's not going to be all at once. It's going to take a couple of years to evolve, but we want to be at the forefront of those evolutions if we can be, from the perspective of project developer, not a technology provider ourselves.
Yeah. All right. So putting your money where your mouth is already, right?
Exactly.
That RFP out there. Tim, any thoughts and concrete next steps about where Envirofit's going?
Yeah, sure. I think just in general, from a cook stove perspective, I think one of the main challenges remains is just around the risk side and the bankability of large scale projects. From our perspective, we feel like that digitization can improve the transparency ultimately to the end buyer, and hopefully help reduce that kind of risk profile, and really make projects more bankable, so that financing solutions don't have to come from really sort of a very small field of operators, and it can be more mainstream financeable. I like where Andrew's thoughts are going in terms of some of the work they're doing, and I think that I can see a lot of that paralleling into the cook stove space, just from improving digital tracking amongst other indicators, SDG indicators, some of the health benefits, which are in parallel with carbon benefits, but A dailies and some of the gender specific benefits, where I think a digital tracking of usage, consumption, and just technology usage itself can really apply. So for us, there's a lot of opportunity to improve that digitization in a technology field that has historically not had electronic feedback or kind of sensor feedback. I mean, you're talking a firewood stove in northern Nigeria, that's way off grid. But finding a way to kind of incorporate that into a digital stream, I think, can help in a lot of ways.
Yeah, definitely. Thanks, Tim. I appreciate you guys online. Thank you so much for joining us today. And thank you to all the speakers, those present as well, and everyone for being with us and contributing to the conversation. The SustainCERT white paper is available on our website if you'd like to read a little bit more about the two approaches and blueprints that we were talking about today. Feel free to approach any of these guys about their digital approaches as well. And we have two colleagues in the room, Simon and Alejandra, who's here as well, who could help you answer any questions you may have. Thank you so much. Have a good afternoon.
Thank you.
Thanks, guys.